Until early this morning, some here in Kiev doubted that he would do it. Not anymore. The West warned Vladimir Putin was about to attack. He said he had no such plans. That fiction now utterly exposed. Explosions right across this vast country. In Ivano-Frankivsk, in the far southwest, a missile struck an airport. Unverified images from Ukraine's northern and southern borders seem to show columns of Russian armour entering from Belarus and Crimea. Within hours, Russian tanks were reported to be on the streets of Ukraine's second largest city, Kharkiv. Whatever Russia says, this attack will not be surgical. To the east of Kharkiv, emergency workers battle to control fires in residential buildings hit by rockets. The number of civilian casualties is rising. At Mariupol in the south, another airport on fire. This country's civilian infrastructure is being heavily struck. There are no more flights in or out. A glance at the map shows a country under attack from east to west, north to south. Earlier, a snarling Russian leader said this was all in self-defense and warned Ukrainians to lay down their arms.
We will strive for the demilitarization and denazification of Ukraine. Russia cannot feel safe, develop and exist with a constant threat emanating from the territory of modern Ukraine.
In Kiev, Ukraine's embattled president, who must now fear for his job, appealed to the world.
Putin started a war against Ukraine, against the whole democratic world. He wants to destroy my country. He wants to destroy our country, everything we have been building, what we live for.
So far, all the signs are that this attack is working out exactly the way Western leaders have been warning for weeks. The country is being attacked from all directions, and the fear now has to be that some of those Russian troops are heading here to the capital. Some people aren't waiting to find out what happens next. The roads out of Kiev jammed with traffic, most of it heading west. These people don't want to be liberated by Vladimir Putin. After weeks of extraordinary calm, this suddenly looks like panic. Mid-morning and two jets fly over the city. It's not clear whose, but it seems only a matter of time before Russia controls the air and much besides. Paul Adams, BBC News, Kiev.
Well, people here in Kyiv woke to the sound of air raid sirens up above as citizens who'd long prayed for peace now had to face war. My colleague Nick Beak has been gauging the thoughts of some of the people here to the extraordinary unfolding events.
The invasion, the attack that Russia promised would never happen, has now started. And the Ukrainian government is urging people to stay calm, and it's appealing to the international community to stop President Putin now.
We soon find Lana and her mum. Russia forced them from their home in Crimea 8 years ago. Now they're on the move again.
It's very, very nervous, and I'm very scared. But I must be strong.
After the overnight attacks from the skies, many are taking refuge underground.
Well, this feels like one of the safest places in the city today, not just because there are lots of soldiers about, but because the metro is doubling up as a bomb shelter. And overnight families have come down here. They're trying to follow the news of what's happening, and they're trying to work out what they're going to do next.
2-year-old Yegor is still smiling, but his mum and dad are worried.
8 bombs.
8 bombs?
8 bombs.
At Borisopol?
In Borisopol.
The war started.
I'm very, very scared for my boy, Alexander says. Then both parents ask, where are NATO to help us? When the bombs started falling, sales manager Mark helped his neighbours.
Russia will occupy Kyiv, which I don't believe happen, because I believe in our army. Well, it will be like another Nazi occupation.
It's still eerily quiet here in the heart of the capital. It seems many have followed government advice to stay at home. Lots of people will have also heard Russia's claim that it carried out targeted strikes on the Ukrainian military. I've got to tell you, people here are saying it doesn't feel like that to them. Instead, they feel that they're under attack and that President Putin has declared war on them.
Nick Beak, BBC News, Kyiv.
The view from here in Ukraine. Well, what about Russia? In an address on state television, Vladimir Putin claimed his country had been left no choice but to defend itself against what he suggested were threats from modern Ukraine, and that Moscow would try to what he called denazify this country. From Moscow, Steve Rosenberg.
From the president of Russia, a fateful decision. Vladimir Putin said military operation. But really, the Kremlin was launching a full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Russian stocks plunged. The ruble hit an all-time low. Fears of conflict superseded by the shock of a war and what may come next.
I think that if Putin is not stopped now in Ukraine, this war would be the beginning of the Third World War.
Vladimir Putin comes across now as a leader with an almost messianic idea to force Ukraine back into Moscow's orbit, even if that means war. What the public might think about that doesn't come into it. He seems determined to achieve his goal. In the centre of Moscow, we're against the war, she says, and we want the whole world to know that. But so far, few Russians have come out to protest. Maybe this is why. In Russia now, protests end like this.
I'm sorry, I'm so shocked. I just can't help crying. I think that most of Russians don't support this. It's horrible.
And why don't they support it?
Because it's not our war. It's war Putin, Biden or anyone else, but not our nation.
I think the Ukrainian soldiers will surrender, she says, and they should. It's terrible to be at war with Ukraine. This is not a conflict the Russian public wants. This is the Kremlin's war. Steve Rosenberg, BBC News, Moscow.
Let's talk to our Eastern Europe correspondent Sarah Rainsford, who's in eastern Ukraine. Sarah, the front line in Russia's quarrel over the last 8 years with Ukraine has been where you are in the east. What's the picture looking like now?
Line could be moving, that if Ukrainian forces have been battling pro-Russian, Russian-backed forces for the past 8 years and kept that line pretty much in place, now those militias are backed by the Russian army. We know that they've rolled into some areas of the Donbass, and we know that there is some heavy fighting going on along the contact line, as it's known, to the south of where I am now. We know there have been civilians killed today in one area, and that there's, as I say, heavy fighting in several places. So people here back a little way from the front line are worried about what that means. They're worried about an advance by Russian troops. They're worried about the fighting coming to their doorstep. For the moment, life is kind of going on as normal. There are children out and about. There are parents with babies. People have gone to work today, although school was cancelled. But there's this kind of air of trepidation about what is coming, because people have seen what happens when this area is taken over by the Russian-backed militias before. Now it's the Russian army who's there too, and they're worried about what exactly that means for their lives going forward.
We have Russian forces coming in from the south, landings in the area of Odessa. We have Russian forces that are pushing out from the contested eastern districts, the oblasts, or for want of a better description, the provinces that where the proxy war with Ukraine has been going on for the last 7 years. And we have Russian troops that have crossed the border from Belarus. Essentially, what they're trying to do, Heather, is they're trying to squeeze the Ukrainian military into a pocket and destroy it. Vladimir Putin pretty much made that clear when he said that he was looking to demilitarize Ukraine. So that is the overall objective and why we're seeing such a broad campaign. There has been a lot of debate among military strategists about what the objective was going to be, because Russia has assembled approximately 190,000 troops, which is, in the view of many Western military analysts, not a large enough force to take over the entire country, let alone hold it for an extended period of time. So it appears, at least from the initial statements and the initial actions, that Russia is intending to try and at least squeeze the Ukrainian military into a pocket east of the Dnieper River. Now, the Dnieper River, it bisects Ukraine, and so this is where the thought is that that they're going to be fighting a lot of the major engagements. The idea in doing this is to blind Ukraine's military leaders and civilian leaders to the actions that the ground forces are taking. And there are three key cities that we should be watching over the next couple of days. The first one is Kharkiv in the north. The other one is Mariupol, which is in the south and very close to the area where the proxy war has been going on. And Odessa is the other. It's the major port city. It is the major economic lifeline for Ukraine. And those areas have many Russian speakers. And it has been a part of Vladimir Putin's propaganda that he's looking to unite Russian speakers. And so those three areas are going to be bellwethers for how well the Ukrainians are managing to stand up to the Russian invasion, because they're key objectives for the Russians, and how quickly they're overrun or how they hold on is going to be very important for us to watch in the next few days.
I have a question about Russia's defense and how capable it is at defending itself in the face of what you've just laid out so clearly, Marie. But I want to bring in, you have some breaking news about Canadians in Ukraine, which I'd like to turn to first before we continue. We know that the Canadian embassy in Kyiv was moved to Lviv. And what is the breaking news that you have now, Marie?
Yes, what we can confirm is that the Canadian embassy has packed up its operations in Lviv, and the ambassador and all of the staff that were remaining are now safely across the border in Poland. This happened today. It happened mostly because of the fact that there has been reports of Russian troops coming across the border in Belarus, and that is further west, and that could very well threaten western parts of Ukraine. And we can confirm from now several sources that the embassy has packed up and left. The Canadian military training mission, which had been in Ukraine, packed up and went several days ago. So the embassy, when it relocated from Kyiv to Lviv, had been there to provide consular services to Canadians. And for the last several days, the Canadian government has been very clear that if there are any Canadians that are in Ukraine, they need to get out immediately.
We are following breaking news tonight. The Russian president says a military operation is now underway in eastern Ukraine. Ukraine's foreign minister calls it a full-scale invasion and says the time for the world to act is now. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has condemned what he calls an egregious attack. Our reporters in Ukraine, in Russia, and in Washington are ready with the latest in this fast-moving story. It is, of course, in Ukraine, where we will start. Margaret Evans in Kyiv standing by, the capital. Margaret, what's the latest?
Well, Andrew, the sun is just coming up here. We have heard within the last hour the sounds of an explosion. It could have been anti-aircraft fire, we're not sure. Earlier, we were hearing reports of the sound of explosions around the airport outside Kyiv. Some contradictory reports coming out. The mayor of Kyiv saying that what people were hearing was anti-aircraft fire. We are hearing from Russia from the other side of the border that they are targeting command structures across Ukraine, but they are not targeting cities. The Ukrainian foreign minister, Dmytro Kuleba, has contradicted that, saying that Ukrainian cities are coming under attack. We're hearing reports that troops are landing in the port city of Odessa. We're hearing that things are bad in Kharkiv, which is a city, mainly Russian language, native Russian-speaking city, close to the border with Russia in the north and the east. Here in the capital, people have been leaving. We've been seeing people coming down the street with their suitcases, but we've also seen people who look like they're going to work. We're hearing that there are long lineups at the gas stations around the city, so potentially people are thinking of leaving. I would say that psychologically here, many people would have thought that this day wouldn't come if there was actually an attack coming on the capital, on the Ukrainian capital. And again, we can't confirm that that's really what's happening yet. But I think most people would tell you that they didn't or couldn't imagine, and still wouldn't imagine, that Russia would want to attempt to occupy Ukraine. Certainly they would believe that Vladimir Putin is interested in potentially regime change here, and some people thought that he would attempt to do that by squeezing this country rather than launching a full-scale military operation, because we've seen a lot of hybrid warfare. We've seen yesterday, there were just, in the hours leading up to the explosions and the news that the invasion had begun, we heard about more cyber attacks here, with a number of Ukrainian government ministry sites going down. That's been happening in the days leading up to that. And of course, the economy here has been suffering. You've seen some businesses leaving the country. You've seen even before today's operation, you saw some major airlines starting to cancel their flights to Ukraine, and a destabilization in terms of psychological warfare, people really not knowing what to expect, whether there was an invasion, whether there wasn't, and it was starting to really fray on people's nerves. So it's still very, very early days, early hours here. We're waiting to see what developments come. And of course, we're watching social media to see what people are saying in other parts of the country as well.
Right. Psychologically, it must be unnerving, if not debilitating. But to your point, with so many conflicting reports and so many early reports coming out from all directions, important to take things one step at a time. Margaret Evans reporting from Kiev tonight. Thank you so much for that. Now, we've got Briar Stewart on the line as well. This coming from Rostov-on-Don in Russia. Briar, you're near the Ukrainian border, near that operation that Vladimir Putin says is underway. Can you tell us what you're hearing?
Well, what the Russian Defense Ministry has said is that they're taking targeted strikes against Ukrainian military installations. But of course, as you heard Margaret say there's conflicting information about, what is being hit and whether or not cities are under attack. As far as the picture here, we know that the airspace has been closed not only over Ukraine, but over the bordering region as well. So where I am in Rostov-on-Don, it's also been closed a little further to the west in Sochi. And so you have a rapidly developing situation. And this really all started after President Vladimir Putin had a speech that was aired on Russian television early this morning. And it was a speech, I should mention, that wasn't live. And Russian media is actually reporting that it was recorded 3 days ago on February 21st. And in that recording that was aired, it is essentially a declaration of war. He talked about how Russia could not live with the threat of Ukraine and that Ukraine had to be demilitarized. He then went on to talk about how if there was any kind of interference from the West, anything at all, Russia would hit back, and that he hopes the West hears that warning because plans were already in the works. So it was a very, chilling message really to hear. And then after that, that's when we started getting all of these reports of explosions in so many different cities across Ukraine. I should mention that, as we've been here in this area talking to people, even people who've been living in communities where they've seen the backdrop of tanks and heavy artillery for weeks, who have seen kind of the military build up around them, there was really a sense of disbelief among a lot of Russians that we spoke to that there would be some kind of full-scale attack. This is an area where they know about the war going on in Donetsk and Luhansk, and they've there was a lot of support, I would say, for Russia recognizing those areas, because you have areas where they are already controlled by separatists. They're aligned with Russia. Over 700,000 people in those regions have Russian passports. So there was a lot of support for that. But speaking to Russians about kind of a larger attack on Ukraine, most people just did not believe something like that would happen. I mean, even people that we were speaking to yesterday and the day before, they just didn't think that Russia would take actions against so many Ukrainian cities and military infrastructure. So it'll be very interesting to see just how the public responds to that, because as we know in Russia, there's been such a repressive system and a crackdown that you don't see the kind of large-scale protests here that you would elsewhere.
Right, and of course, we will wait to see to what extent this invasion will progress, how protracted a campaign it might be, if it continues beyond the next few minutes, few hours, few days. We don't know. Briar Stewart reporting from Rostov-on-Don in Russia. Thank you.